in an overall sense, what would the impact of relegation have on Everton's finances?
So maybe if I add some historical context to this, to the answer, uh, in the past under Fard Mashiri, and obviously the last 2 or 3 years, relegation has been quite a significant risk for the club, given its footballing performance. It would have had significant impacts on the club in previous years, and last year in particular, there was a very high probability of the club going into administration had we been relegated. And that was for two principal reasons. One, the stadium hadn't been fully financed at that stage. And two, Mashiri, because of the Russian war in Ukraine, didn't have access to any fresh funds. And the club, as you know, is a loss-making club and is still a loss-making club. So we would have been in huge difficulties had we been relegated. You know, in broad brush terms, relegation would probably cost the club probably around about £90 million in the first year, and then because the payments that are made to clubs goes down if you stay out of the Premier League, the parachute payments goes down in year 2 and year 3. Those losses would have increased in years 2 and year 3, and as I say, under the previous ownership, we just wouldn't have been able to survive that. Now, whilst nobody wants us to be relegated, and hopefully with David Moyes coming in, we won't be, even if we were to be relegated, whilst we still lose all of that revenue, because the balance sheet is now so much stronger under the Friedkins because of, as you said a couple of minutes ago, the Friedkins, A, investing cash, and B, restructuring the debt so that the debt is now long-term debt as against short-term, which it was in the past. The loss of revenue would be the same, but the impact of that loss of revenue would be much reduced for those reasons. So it would cause some short-term difficulties, but it wouldn't be existential in the sense that it would have been in previous years.
Would that affect the revenue you'd be able to get out of the stadium? Would that be affected, by it hosting a championship side rather than a Premier League side in its, grand opening season?
No, so when the club was putting together what's called an investment deck, when it was going out looking for fresh investors or fresh lenders to the club, they had to model what the impact of relegation would be in terms of the stadium. And you're quite right to say that we're moving into the stadium whether we were to be relegated or not. And the general view was that moving into the stadium and being relegated would reduce revenues by about 10%. So what does that really mean in cash terms? The expected revenues from the new stadium in terms of match day revenues is that they will go up from less than 20 million, which is currently what we earn at Goodison, to around about 55 million at Bramley-Moore. And then on top of that, you can add any naming rights that may occur, although there's no naming rights deal yet. But let's assume, and I think the accurate figure would be around about £10 million for naming rights. And then you'd have additional sponsorship opportunities inside the stadium, and possibly, like, for example, Arsenal have done and Manchester City have done a deal that includes front of shirt sponsorship and the naming rights. If that was the case, that 10 million for the naming rights would probably be somewhere around about 25 to 30 million in total. So the total revenue from the stadium is likely to be, if we got a naming rights deal, somewhere around about somewhere between 80 and 90 million pound. And that's what's anticipated when we move in, if we're in the Premier League. If we were to be relegated when we move in next season, that would drop by about 10%.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
there wouldn't be a there wouldn't be a massive reduction in season ticket prices. In fact, there would be no reduction in season ticket prices. And the club argued that because if you think about it, when you're in the Premier League, you have 19 home games, but if you're in the Championship, you have 23 home games.
Yeah.
So what they said was that they would still charge the same amount for season tickets, but obviously people are getting
There'd
those
be more
have
football to
season
watch.
tickets.
Yeah.
There's more football to watch, so that's where the sort of the benefit comes in for fans. Although nobody wants to be in the Championship, obviously. So yeah, it
Mm.
probably cost around about 10%. So um, based on my model, around about anywhere between £8 and £9 million a year.
Yeah.
Which is significant, but we're still, if we were to drop into the Championship, we would be by far and away, we would have the highest revenue of all clubs in
Yeah.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
Championship. So, competitively, we'd actually be in a stronger position in the Championship vis-a-vis all the other clubs in the Championship than we are in the Premier League, which is obviously, we're not competitive financially, even under the
Mm.
Friedkins, because our revenues are still low compared to, you know, uh, Liverpool, Manchester City, Chelsea, Arsenal, etc.
If the club were to get relegated, would there, do you know if there'd be a risk of the EFL looking into the finances, or, putting Everton under scrutiny for their own FFP, because I know that they have a lot stricter window of losses. I think I saw somewhere the other day it was 39 million in losses
Yeah,
over a 3 year period
yeah,
instead of
that's
a
right. And
hundred and
obviously,
something
yeah,
in the
we
Premier League.
we would obviously fall foul of that if we were to drop into the Championship. But there's also there's some consideration given for clubs that are relegated. So
Okay.
there's an additional allowance. It's difficult to say exactly what would happen because, as Leicester have proved, they've argued. For example, when they were in the Championship, they argued that the Premier League had no jurisdiction over them because they weren't part of the same legal entity. And
Yeah.
I think that defence would also be used by Everton to say to the EFL, well, yeah, your regulations say this, but actually, what we did when we were in the Premier League has got nothing to do with you because it's a totally
Yeah.
different and separate legal entity. So the idea that they may be able to, the EFL may be able to charge Everton, I think the probability of that is much less than it might have been had we been talking 2 or 3 years ago. Um,
Yeah.
it would have been much more likely in those circumstances than it would be today.
I suppose, is that then a charge by the EFL would it become more likely if Everton don't then immediately get re-promoted? Is that then when you start
Yes,
thinking
yeah. I mean,
we
we'd
need
still have
to?
to We'd probably have to go. Well, we would have to go 3 years in the Championship before
Okay, yeah,
all of the Premier League stuff was effectively wiped out. But obviously, the longer we stay in the Championship, A, the greater the losses are, and B, the more effect the EFL regulations have as against what were the Premier League regulations previously.
the PSR deadline for the Premier League was 2 days ago now. Well, not the deadline, but when we found out if the clubs were going to be getting charged was 2 days ago, and Everton weren't charged. Do you know if they were close to being charged? There were a lot of rumours that Leicester were going to get charged, and then on the morning of, it was um, reported that actually they'd just about gotten away with it. Or this time around, were Everton quite comfortable in, avoiding uh, falling foul of PSR?
It's a really good, well, one, it's a really good question. And secondly, it's a really difficult question to answer because the one outstanding issue with the Premier League for Everton is how the Premier League consider the treatment of interest charges on the previous loans because there is an outstanding charge or claim by the Premier League against Everton on that count, and that hasn't yet been finalised. Well, in fact, the case hasn't yet even been heard, and how close we were to breaking PSR is pretty much contingent on what the Premier League decide or what the independent commission decide on Everton's interest charges. If they accept Everton's stance that it's perfectly acceptable to capitalise or to ignore the interest charges because they related to the stadium, then Everton weren't close to being in breach. If you took the view that the Premier League say, well, no, actually, we're not going to accept that because these were interest charges based on working capital requirements rather than stadium build requirements.
Mm-hmm.
I think we would be quite close, but obviously not close enough to be in breach because
Yeah.
we will have made a loss in 23-20 financial year 23-24, which is the last year that was considered.
Everton haven't in the last couple of windows haven't been free spenders. The last two windows, or in the last summer window, and then both last January and the summer before that, in all of those windows, they made a profit. Sort of obviously selling more than they were paying for players. Are we likely to see a limited number of transfers this January and onto the summer, whether they're in the Premier League or the Championship? Is there still not much available to David Moyes to spend on new additions?
There's a massive need to bring new people in because the squad is very threadbare. And obviously, next summer we lose, I think it's 11 or 12 players who are going to be out of contract. And it doesn't look like the club are going to offer many of those players new contracts or extensions of existing contracts.
Yeah.
Partly because some of them are not that good, and partly because some of them are quite elderly now, anyway, or at least in the context of being professional footballers. Moyes is obviously pressing publicly to get players in January, and I think we will have to do that because obviously we need a goal scorer.
Yeah.
The fact that Brogier's gone back to Chelsea or will be going back to Chelsea today because of his long-term injury and helps us in that sense. So we've got a free loan spot now because obviously you're subject to a restriction on the number of people that you
Yeah.
can loan within the Premier League or from Premier League clubs, I should say. So I would expect Brozier at least that loan to be Brozier to be replaced by somebody else, and that person would probably be a goal scorer or somebody who's capable of scoring goals. But I don't expect us to spend a huge amount of money on any permanent transfers in January.
Yeah.
I think in the summer that will change, and we will make. Don't ask me what the budget is because I've got no idea. But I think we'll make a number of permanent signings in the summer, although they're going to be typical Moyes signings in the sense that they're going to be low value or low financial value, but hopefully big value in terms of the type of players that we bring in. The days of spending ridiculous sums on badly performing players have long gone, one hopes. So
Yeah.
limited activity this January, but much more activity in the summer.
Well, that's definitely a positive to look forward to. Everyone loves a transfer. I think the summer screams of like players that Moyes trusts, in my opinion, anyway. This time next year, like someone like Thomas Souček playing for Everton or Soufal or something like that. That's just
Right.
my opinion, anyway.
Yeah, yeah, very much so.
Um, yeah, that's all the questions I had for you, really.
Great. Well, good luck with it, and yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much for your time.
All right. Cheers, Cam. Take care. Bye.
Cheers. Thank you. Bye.